Good morning, BookTube. This is Johnny. I made a video last night. That was April the 8th. This is April the 9th. It is a morning here in West Michigan. It is 7:32 in the morning here in the Hermit Hut. And I was writing in my diary before I clicked on to make this video. I'm on page 315 for the year 2019. And I was looking at the book I got in the mail yesterday, Gregor the Great, More Reflections on the Book of Job. This is volume 5, books 23 to 27. In this volume, Gregor the Great covers chapter 32 of the book of Job, verse 1 through chapter 37, verse 24 of the book of Job. Now I showed you that this is going to be, there's one more volume in this series. I showed you the series. This is volume 5, volume 4 of Gregor the Great, More Reflections on the Book of Job. And then you have volume 3, and then you have volume 2 and volume 1, and there's another volume. Now you would look at this and you think, wow, this is really a substantial work on the Old Testament book of Job. But I want to show you a Puritan work, and this Puritan work is called A Practical Observations on Job. And it was by the Puritan Joseph Carl, who lived, let me see here, I have this book here. Let's see. This is, this book here is called Meet the Puritans, with a Guide to Modern Reprints by Joel R. Beakey and Randall J. Peterson. Joseph Carl was born in Carl, I don't know, 1602, and he died in 1673, and he was born in London in 1602. And he wrote this volume called An Exposition on the Book of Job, which is over 8,000 pages. 8,000. Now you talk about a March Mammoth. I'm going to show you. I've shown these in the past, but this is volume 1 of the Practical Observations on Job by Joseph Carl. This is chapters 1 through 3 of Job. And then you have volume 2, Practical Observations on Job, chapters 4 through 7. Now this is a facsimile, so if you read it, it's how it would look in the 17th century. The printing. So it's almost an original. Well, it's a reprint, but it looks like the original. And then this is volume 3, chapters 8 through 10 of the Practical Observations on Job. And like this is over 500 and something pages, just volume 3. And then you have volume 4, chapters 11 through 14 of the book of Job, Practical Observations on Job. And you can look at it, see how it's very dense. And then you have chapter 5, chapters 15 through 17. And he's going through each chapter of the book of Job. He's expository preaching. So that's why I'm saying in the Presbyterian, Reformed, Calvinistic churches, they go through the books of the Bible. They go through the book of Job, like the old Puritans, and they would go from chapter 17 of Job, and they go, and what you have here is his exposition of the book of Job, and this is what you would find in a good, solid Presbyterian, Calvinistic church. They preach exegetical, expository sermons. They preach the text, they open the text up, they give you the literal meaning, they give you the historical background, they tell you what it means, and then they apply it. They apply it maybe they apply it to everyday godly living in this American wasteland. So then you have this is volume 6, chapters 18 through 21 of the book of Job. And then you have volume 7 of Practical Observations on Job, chapters 22 through 26. Volume 8, chapters 27 through 29. These are Practical Observations on Job. And then you have volume 10, chapters 32 to 34. And then you have volume 9, chapters 30 through 31, Practical Observations on Job. And this one, this is 700 pages. And then you have volume 11, chapters 35 to 37 of the book of Job. These are Practical Observations, expository sermons. And then you have the last volume, chapters 38 to 42. Now, see, this is what I'm saying. This is what this old Puritan did. He went through the book of Job over a long period of time, and he preached it. Chapter by chapter, verse by verse. And he did that over, I don't know how long it took him. And so that's what I would expect if I was to go to a church, to find a minister. And I've been under ministries who have done this. Many, many, many years ago, the first time I went to a Presbyterian Calvinistic church, the minister was going through the book of Job, chapter by chapter, verse by verse. He went through it for a couple of years. And I've been to churches where the minister went through Ezekiel, Deuteronomy, the 4 Gospels, the book of Acts. I mean, if you go to any good Calvinistic Presbyterian church, Dutch Reformed, in the old Dutch Reformed, they preach through the Bible. And so, yeah, it says here, let me see, I think it tells you how long it took him to preach through it. The first 10 volumes of Carl's work are sermons that he preached at St. Magus. The last 2 were completed after the Act of Uniformity. Believing that the book of Job was relevant to the times, Carl preached it 424 times over a period of 24 years, averaging 10 sermons per chapter. It has been said that his congregation dwindled significantly during that time. History, however, affords no evidence to confirm this report. Besides, one must bear in mind that over those 24 years, Carl preached an average of 3 sermons on Job every 2 months. So I showed you the old Puritan, but we all know about John Calvin. And John Calvin preached through the book of Job, and these are his sermons. This is a facsimile of a 1574 edition of the sermons that John Calvin, the great French Geneva Reformation minister and preacher, preached. And you can read these sermons. See? I read these a while back. Calvin did the same thing. Calvin set the model for what preaching ought to be. He went through the book of Job, chapter by chapter, verse by verse. You can also read this good book, Calvin's Teaching on Job, Proclaiming the Incomprehensible God by Derek Thomas. So I'm just saying, you could spend a lifetime reading and studying and pondering and meditating on the Old Testament book of Job, because the Bible is a unity. If you look at a verse in Job, you're going to look at the whole Word of God. You'll have unsearchable riches and material to preach on. So these are just some of the books I have on the book of Job. I have modern commentaries on Job. I have Old Testament studies on Job and things like that. So I just thought I'd share these books with you. And right now I am getting blinded by the sun pouring in through our sun porch. I opened the windows, the shades, and they're shining right into my eye. So I'm going to have to sign off. I just wanted to show you these books on the book of Job. And yeah, share some of my thoughts about preaching and teaching the Word of God. And yeah, maybe someday I'll get around to reaching this mammoth on the practical observations on Job by Joseph Carl. So until next time, I hope you're having a good day, that you have a good new week. It's not a good new week. Today is a Tuesday. And so yeah, I'll sign off. Until next time, bye.